So coalition talks are underway for the country's political parties, just a few days left before the president needs to be elected in the National Assembly. But government of national unity being what the ANC wants, the parties have so much to discuss, but so little time. And what happens if they can't come to any agreement at all? Well, for more on this, let's now bring in the Economic Freedom Fighters Deputy President Floyd Shivambu, who's joining us via video link. Floyd, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. Will you become the finance minister of this country?
Good morning, Aldrin, and good morning to viewers of Newzroom Afrika. I don't think that is the context of the discussion that we are currently having. And that is the least important of areas of focus now. What we're focusing on is to reach a consensus amongst progressive political parties that will constitute a stable government based on sound principles as to how to prioritize the interest of our people. The issue of who occupies which position and who doesn't is a secondary issue. It's not a primary issue. What we are busy with now is to try to build a consensus on constituting a stable government now that there is no outright winner from the 2024 elections. So that is basically our main focus now. The issue of positions is secondary. It's not the most important of our focus areas now.
Okay, how close are you to reaching that consensus?
Look, we're still in the discussions. We've had meetings with the ANC, we've had meetings with Mkhonto as a party as well to try to weave a consensus as to how do we constitute a government that will have sound ideological basis and principles that guide such a government, because we do not think that a government must be formed just for the sake of it. We cannot go and form a concoction of ideologically opposed political parties, of parties that have different fundamentally and irreconcilable foreign policy positions. We think that a government should be constituted of like-minded forces, or those that can find some common ground on certain issues, and then we then talk about the issues of positions later on. But currently there is no yet consensus that has been presented. Of course, the ANC has been shopping around, talking to all political parties, and it appears that they have not yet even finalized amongst themselves as to what will be the final approach. But it appears that a dominant faction within the ANC wants to work with the Democratic Alliance, because that is what their masters have instructed them to do.
Yeah. Do you then foresee that being the possibility that the ANC would end up working with the Democratic Alliance? And if it does do so, does that mean that the EFF will not be part of that government of national unity?
Look, yeah, there's a possibility that the ANC might work with the Democratic Alliance. And if that is what is an outcome of the collective wisdom of the ANC leadership and membership, let them go ahead and do it. We have presented a framework of a core government with the ANC based on sound and clear principles as to how do we deal with the redress question, how do we provide free education to our people, how do we deal with the land question, how do we make sure that strategic sectors of the economy begin to benefit all the people of South Africa, how do we avoid a situation that attained in South Africa since 1994, after the Elite Pact of 1994, where black majority and Africans in particular remain on the margins of the economy. So we've given a clear framework as to what should happen. But if the African National Congress wants to work with a right-wing Democratic Alliance that undermines workers' rights, that does not ascribe to the progressive foreign policy positions, that has got no regard for the redress questions, that think that we must just ignore what happened under apartheid and colonialism, let them go ahead and do it, and then we'll deal with that in Parliament from time to time as to how do we relate to such a government of a former liberation movement and a right-wing political organization that represents apartheid and colonialism. We'll treat them as such when they take that decision. We are, Aldrin, not desperate as the EFF to constitute the government. We are not desperate to be occupying positions, and someone possibly could have misled the ANC that just go to them and talk nothing, and then they will jump into the bandwagon because you would promise them positions. We are now talking to principles as to what constitutes the foundation of a coalition government and how do we prioritize our people, because it can't be an elite pact. It can't just be us sharing positions without a principle as to how do we benefit our people? How do our people benefit from government? How do we leverage government resources to economically empower and transform the entirety of society so that all of us have sustainable livelihoods, not just a small fraction of society like it has been the case since 1994.
Floyd, from your assessment and also what you are considering that the possibility of the ANC working with the Democratic Alliance, would the EFF concede that the Democratic Alliance has actually beaten you at this game of politics, considering that you've had experience voting informally so with the Democratic Alliance before, when you called them the better devil, but later on you worked also with the ANC following the 2021 local government elections in the Hung, in some of the Hung metros at least, that even with that particular track record and working with the ANC, it seems though that the ANC at a national level is not keen to work with the EFF.
No, I don't think, first, Aldrin, that politics is a game where people must beat each other and trick each other in terms of arrangements of elites on who must constitute which government. We correctly took a decision in 2016 and 2021 to vote the ANC out of the local government because it was not practically possible during that period. Remember, in 2016, the EFF was 3 years old, and there was still lingering suspicions that the EFF is an offspring or is controlled by the ANC. There was no way, when the ANC was voted out of the local state, we were going to return them to power immediately through the back door. And we took a decision not to vote for the DA, by the way, to vote for all opposition parties, for the IFP in KwaZulu-Natal, for residents' associations in Metsimaholo, in Modumuli, Mokopong, in Tabazimbi, in many other areas. We voted for opposition parties to unplug the ANC from power so that we could compete in terms of politics of principle without control of state resources on the ground. And that is what we did. And if you were to check the latest update, by the way, we removed the Democratic Alliance in the cities of Johannesburg, in the city of Nelson Mandela Bay, in the city of Ekurhuleni. We're part of government as the EFF now and co-working with the African National Congress. And despite these many other things which certain sections of society are trying to fundraise, there is maximal and optimal stability in Nelson Mandela Bay municipality. There is optimal stability in the city of Johannesburg. There's optimal stability in the city of Ekurhuleni. Of course, there was a change of mayor, and we voted for the ANC mayor who is presiding over government, which includes, amongst others, EFF, 5 EFF members of the mayoral committee. So the stability in terms of what happens, it's not an issue of games of
so that's the thing, right, Floyd? Is that
it's a principal issue.
Despite you working with the ANC at a local government level, finally, is that the very same ANC, seemingly from your own analysis, is not willing to work with the EFF at a national level. How should we understand that? And what's the EFF's reading and understanding of what's happening there?
Let me lay something very clear, is that one of the things which has been definitive of the African National Congress, and something which we have observed even in all our deliberations about the government at the local state and now at the national level, is that the ANC is not a unitary organization that it claims to be. So if you were to go and check even the public statements of the ANC, despite the National Executive Committee saying to the local and provincial leaders of Gauteng, of Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal that they must pull out of an agreement with the EFF, the provinces said that, but this is the only logical thing to do. Even now, the most logical thing to do is to constitute a government with the EFF. But there is a faction, there is a grouping within the National Executive Committee of the ANC that is acting on the instruction, we suspect, and legitimately so, on the instruction of the white capitalist establishment that says that under no circumstances should we have any relationship with the economic freedom fighters. The same attitude that is taken by the Democratic Alliance that has characterized us as enemy number one. But on the ground, if you go and engage with National Executive Committee members of the ANC individually and provinces, they do tend to agree with the EFF. That is manifested, by the way, with the governments that are participating in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal in the Eastern Cape, is due to the engagements with provincial leadership, not with the national leadership. It's not a unitary organization, the ANC, that it claims to be. And at the highest level, it is controlled elsewhere for the interest of the white capitalist establishment, not for the interest of the people. That is why they're trying by all means to break a potential consensus that will reach to constitute government together.
Yeah. Then why do you want to work with such a political party if that is the case? What you've just described now of the ANC being controlled from elsewhere. And can I just ask this question as well, Floyd? When the EFF was started, one of the campaigns that you'd push was, of course, that you are government in waiting and you want to unseat the ANC. The ANC's threshold for the first time, it secured only 40% of the vote. So essentially the ANC's hand has been taken off that lever of power. Why would an opposition party then come back again and say that, okay, let's work with this particular political party, even though we've tried to unseat this party and now it doesn't have the power that it used to be, but we are still willing to work with this political party? How should we understand the politics of the opposition in this country? What was the intention? What was the end goal? That once the ANC is below that 50% plus one, then what?
So I'm sure you're aware of the political developments here in South Africa, that the ideal situation, which we're not apologetic about as well as the EFF, was that when the ANC goes below 50%, we had initially and are currently said that let all political parties consolidate and constitute government outside of the African National Congress, because majority of the people of South Africa have now demonstrated through elections that they don't want the ANC to be government. But you know what has happened is that sections of the white capitalist establishments, the Oppenheimers in particular, want to found and fund political parties to oppose the economic freedom fighters. So you have a situation where opposition parties characterize the EFF as primary enemy, not the ruling party. And how do we work with such people? And how do we then fold our arms and we say that we're going to collaborate with these people irrespective of how they characterize us? We're not going to fold our arms. If the DA thinks we are the enemy, it is the enemy itself. And we're not going to treat it with any respect. We're not going to participate in any government with the DA, which has been spending millions and millions of rands. Not only the DA, Action SA, all these Mickey Mouse political organizations have been funded to delegitimize and decampaign the economic freedom fighters. And we can't constitute any government with such. Okay. And as a matter of fact, there are core-based principles that define the written policies of the ANC and the written policies of the economic freedom fighters on areas that we can agree upon. One thing that you must always appreciate, and which I've just illustrated to you now, is that the ANC is not homogeneous. It's controlled by different interests. It is perpetually contested. Okay. That is why we engage with it, knowing that within the ANC, there are elements that are right-wing, purely right-wing, and they want to work with the DA. They don't want to hear anything else. But there are elements which, by the way, we associate with the economic freedom fighters' generation of economic freedom in our lifetime, whom we interact with, and we get to even constitute governments together, to the dismay and to the disregard and disapproval of certain sections in the ANC. So we engage with the ANC because we know that it's not homogeneous in terms of how it approaches certain questions. And one of the questions where the ANC is not homogeneous is on this question of coalitions. That is why they still do not have a consolidated position as to what is to be done moving forward.
Okay, finally, Floyd, you have your National People's Assembly that's coming up later on this year in December. Considering how the party has fared in these elections, have any EFF members approached you to stand for the position of president of the EFF? What's your take on it?
There is no such a discussion about the issues of the National People's Assembly, of the economic freedom fighters. That process is not even obsessing any of the leadership of the organization. And as far as we're concerned, the Commander-in-Chief has been leading the EFF very well, and I don't think that there's any problem with him leading the organization moving forward. So those things of divisive components that will try to split the EFF on leadership questions will not succeed. Our focus now is to constitute a government if it's possible. If not constitute government, will continue to be an effective and efficient opposition that will continue to advocate for the interests of the rule of South Africa. Okay,
your worst electoral outcome, speaking about the provinces comparatively, has been in KZN as well, where you've lost around 75% of your voter base there. What went wrong? And will the EFF be working with the MK party in that province?
No, look, the formation of Umkhonto as a party caused huge waves. Like, we are, as the EFF, lost 4%, 5% of the vote which we received in 2019. The African National Congress lost 40% of the vote which they received in 2019. But if you were to look into the overall loss of votes at a national scale, the ANC lost 17%, from 57% in 2019 to 40% now. But the EFF did not lose more than 2% of the vote at the national level, which, by the way, illustrates that we are fortified as an organization in all corners of South Africa. There were tectonic shifts in KwaZulu-Natal due to the formation of Umkhonto weSizwe, and we respect that the people of KwaZulu-Natal have chosen Umkhonto weSizwe. We are in engagement with Umkhonto weSizwe with the aim of constituting a government with them in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. We're even talking about constituting government with them in Gauteng, and if there is any consensus that will be reached, we think that Umkhonto weSizwe must play a role as well, a significant role in national government. Because there are no fundamental ideological differences that exist between the economic freedom fighters and Umkhonto weSizwe party. And unlike the ANC, Umkhonto weSizwe party is unified in terms of the ideological positions and what interests they seek to advance, that they want to advance and deal with the issues that affect the historically disadvantaged people of South Africa, which is the black majority and Africans in particular. They are unapologetic about that, and the EFF is also unapologetic about that. So we will constitute government with MK when the time permits, and after they have exhausted all the measures that they are engaged in now to satisfy themselves that the electoral outcomes reflect the will of the people.
Thank you so much, Floyd Shivambu. A very important point that he left that conversation on, and that is the will of the people. The EFF, of course, saying that they will work with the Umkhonto weSizwe political party. Umkhonto weSizwe earlier on telling us that they will not be attending all of the first provincial legislature sittings where premiers will be set to be elected.